们就现在来开始那我们今天主办单位3个联合主办那这边是中国医药大学那我们请台湾医学生联合会就是中国医药大学的同学台湾医学生联合会的欧世成同学来开场欧同学请。
校长，还有Caldicott 女士，然后还有各位今天来参加的先生女士，大家好。那今天很高兴有这个机会可以跟台湾环境保护联盟还有妈妈监督核电厂联盟一起来主办这个演讲讲座，让我们大家更了解辐射对人体会有什么影响。那我们先自我介绍一下，我们是台湾医学生联合会人权与和平部门。那这个部门呢，主要呢是重视人权，还有关心弱势族群。那另外呢，我们同学也积极参与就是社会的一些活动，所以我们在这一学期呢，也非常热心的参与有关于核能的议题。那在校内呢，也有举办一些跟核能有关的活动。那像我们也有办过一些反核的演讲。那在9月份呢，即将会有一个环境跟能源的摄影展览。那我们也招募一些跟核能有关议题有兴趣的同学一起来参与这样子。那这是我们的一些活动的简引。那这是请那个高成炎教授来我们学校演讲的时候的一个情况。那其他还有一些活动也都是关怀弱势族群的。那我们今天很高兴能有这个机会呢，来了解这个辐射对人体的影响，让大家更了解核能在我们生活中扮演的角色。那接下来的时间呢，就请交给高成炎教授，谢谢。
接下来我们请妈妈监督核电联盟这个杨顺美杨总干事讲几句话杨总干事请。
校长还有 Helen 们所有的在场的朋友们，大家午安。非常高兴我们有机会到台中，把 Helen 介绍给大家。今年年底不管是不是年底会有公投，或者是如果延到明年公投吧 ，anyway， 如果公投是一个我们对于核四选择的最后一个方法的话，我觉得那个资讯公开是一件非常非常重要的事情。我们所有的人民应该在知道了所有的资讯之后，然后做出自己的选择，而不是被蒙盖的讯息或被错误的讯息蒙盖的情况下去做决定。决定是我们自己做的，可是在那之前，所有的资讯都应该要公开。辐射我们在过去谈的都是谈跟环境的影响，或是谈核能、核电，台湾到底电够不够？可是对于健康的影响这一块，过去是做的比较少的。昨天我们在台北举办过一场讲座，中研院副教授，中研院副院长陈建仁陈副院长就说了，台湾使用核电30多年了，可是我们对于公共卫生这一块，核电对于人体健康这一块都没有做长期的调查、追踪跟研究。我们把低阶核废料放在兰屿，可是我们对于兰屿当地民众的健康有没有受影响，我们没有做调查。我觉得这是一个非常非常不公义的事情，所以我们希望透过 Helen 来台湾，把对于辐射跟我们健康的这种影响，可以让更多的人知道，特别是中部地区的民众。虽然核电厂不在你家附近，核电厂离我在台北的家很近，对中部的朋友来说，也许对你影响不大，可是只要核意外一发生，整个台湾都逃不掉。这是跟我们所有台湾人都有关系的，所以非常谢谢大家来，也希望今天没有来的朋友，你们回去可以告诉他们，到我们妈妈监督核电厂联盟的网站上，或是跟其他相关反核团体的网站上。我不是说你们一定要相信上面所有的东西，但是你可以把所有的讯息做比较，就可以知道说有多少讯息我们其实不知道。 谢谢大家，谢谢。
谢谢。Dr. Caldicott， 还有黄校长，我今天很高兴能够有这个机会来这边要来介绍这个 Dr. Caldicott 的演讲。那在演讲之前我先来放一个 page 的东西。这个 page 的东西是我2个礼拜前我是高成炎在1990年回到台湾以后就从事缓和工作，到今天应该再加上美国的时间其实我是从1986年开始就非常积极在缓和。那这一份是2个礼拜前我去日本我们讲精确的时间是6月23号到27号。那我们去日本，我们在日本的时间，我们走的路是这样我们访问这些地方，然后我把这个地点然后这个是量的这个辐射值我把它平均放在这里。那我要让大家知道的是，东京离福岛一场是200公里那这个西山地热离福岛一场是100多公里那这个福岛市离福岛是60公里南向马市离福岛是20至30公里，然后浪江町离福岛是5公里。那大家可以看到这个状况。那我再跟大家补充另外一点，在日本的背景值是0.05在日本的背景值是0.05，台湾大部分地方是0.1，台北是0.2。那我们看到东京的国会里面是它的背景值的10倍以上200公里以外的地方。所以呢，在我们这边即使是在台中如果发生事情的话，我们会怎样我想大家就可以了解那今天我们很高兴来介绍Helen那他在当了医生以后在波士顿这个当了医生以后哈佛教书，然后1978年的时候1979年这个三里岛事件，那他就开始从事缓和工作，至今那最重要的就是说1985年他成立了这个国际医学防止这个防止核害的这个联盟也得到诺贝尔的和平奖。那他努力不懈到今天还一直在从事缓和的工作，所以我们非常有荣幸能够请到他来台湾来给大家这么这个 close 这么亲近的一个演讲那我们算是非常荣幸啦尤其是我能够主持这个演讲会我觉得非常荣幸。那我们现在就以最热烈的掌声来欢迎Helen欢迎。
Anyway, I need the whiteboard up, please. Where's the
他先不是他是这个要先上去。
That's all of Japan. All the brown is radioactive fallout. Yeah. Now what I want to talk to you about, it's very nice to talk to medical students. Very important that you understand this. I was not taught the dangers of nuclear power in medical school, and in fact the dangers are still not taught, nor are the dangers of nuclear war taught in medical school. And in fact nuclear war could occur tonight because Russia and America still target each other with thousands of nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, with a 3-minute decision time by either Putin or Obama. And people are hacking into the early warning system now. Computers make mistakes. And if there was a nuclear war, there are 60 hydrogen bombs targeted on Moscow alone, and probably 60 on Washington DC. And every city is targeted in Russia, China by the Americans, surely Taiwan, in America, Canada, Europe, England, Australia. And if a nuclear war occurred, the cities would just burn, and a huge cloud of toxic black radioactive smoke would rise up, circling the earth, blocking out the sun for up to 10 years, dropping the temperatures to as low as, well, we call it nuclear winter, and everything and everyone would freeze to death in the dark. And no one talks about that. This is the greatest public health hazard the world could be facing, yet Russia and America are friends. So what do they think they're doing? And we just sit by, letting them maybe blow us all up any day or any night by politicians who don't really understand science. So now I'm going to walk you through radiation. You will know some of this already from your medical studies. Hands up those who don't understand mutation. You all understand mutation of genes? Yes? Yes? Recessive, dominant, sex-linked? Yes? Good. Okay, so there are 4 sorts of radiation, X-rays, and we know that, non-particulate, and we use them all the time in medicine. In fact, the greatest irradiators of the public at the moment are doctors, particularly with CT scans, which give you a really big dose. Many radiologists don't even know the dose of CT scans, but they're starting to write about it now because children who have quite a few CT scans now are developing increased rates of leukemia and cancer, because we know children are 10 to 20 times more radiosensitive than adults. Little girls are twice as sensitive as little boys, and fetuses are thousands of times more sensitive. And so the population is heterogeneous in terms of its sensitivity to radiation, including immunosuppressed patients and the like. We all know that. So, and we also walk through X-ray machines in airports. We are nonchalant about radiation, and that's very bad because we know that radiation is cumulative, and each dose you receive adds to your risk of getting cancer because your regulatory gene could be damaged, right? You all understand? If you don't understand what I'm saying, put your hand up, okay? Yeah. So X-rays, non-particulate electronic radiation. Then there's gamma radiation given off by radioactive elements such as cobalt-60 that we use in medicine and other such isotopes. Same sort of non-particulate radiation. Then there's alpha radiation, which is composed of 2 protons and 2 neutrons emitted from an unstable atom. And the alpha radiation travels a very short distance. In fact, the dead layers of epidermis prevent the alpha particle hitting viable cells in the dermis. However, if you inhale an alpha emitter and it lands in your lung, just a very small volume of cells are irradiated. And most die within that volume, but some on the periphery remain viable because radiation decreases with the square of the distance, all right? So they remain viable. And then, obviously, some will have their regulatory genes damaged, and the cell will sit quietly for 5 to 80 years, the latent period of carcinogenesis, and one day the cell starts dividing and there's a cancer. Alpha emitters are 10 to 20 times more carcinogenic and energetic than X-rays and gamma radiation. And that's uranium and it's plutonium and all the other elements which I'll describe. Then there's beta radiation, which is emitted from an unstable nucleus composed of an electron, and they all do the same thing. They all mutate genes. I don't have to go into mutation of genes in the germ cells, in the sperm and the eggs, right? But now I'm a pediatrician. My specialty is cystic fibrosis. You don't have it. It's only in the Caucasian population. But there are now 2,600 genetic diseases described, and we learn more all the time. And almost all mutations in germ cells are deleterious. They cause disease. Very few are advantageous. And that's how radiation caused evolution. When the radiation levels were very high, there was a mutation, so fish developed lungs, and birds developed wings. And over eons of time, billions of years, we evolved. But we're filling the atmosphere up and the human beings up with radiation to cause deleterious mutations for the rest of time. So we are damaging the building blocks of life by having nuclear power and by zapping people with X-rays. Doctors are very arrogant, and patients, you know, the doctor will say, you need an X-ray. And we don't say as a patient, well, why? We tend to regard doctors as God because we play God in our white coats and our stethoscopes. But it's very important that the patients understand, do they really need this X-ray or not? So each dose you receive is cumulative. Now, the nuclear industry talks about natural background radiation. Natural. Well, of course, we know that up to 30% of cancers we see are caused by natural background radiation, from cosmic rays, from radon, from the rocks on the Earth. And so there's no difference between any sort of radiation in terms of medical implications. Okay? The nuclear industry lies. They're engineers, they're physicists, and they don't understand medicine. And I have to debate with them, and they are quite hostile. And they attack me personally. They call me an old woman and stuff like that, which has nothing to do with anything. The thing is, I'm talking medicine and science, and they don't understand it. And then the politicians listen to the nuclear industry, and the doctors tend to stay in their consulting rooms dealing with their patients, reading the literature, because you have to read the literature, and we don't have time to go out and go on television and say, now President Ma, these are the facts, and President Ma has to be taught what the facts are. Okay, so that's the beginning. Now, let's look at some of the isotopes made in reactors. I'll just use example of 4. I-131, we all know about that, right? We use it to treat thyroid cancer. We use it to diagnose thyroid cancer, whether a nodule is hot or cold. We use it to treat thyroid metastases. It's got a half-life of 8 days, so it's around for about 10 weeks before it decays to 0. It's a beta and a gamma emitter, quite a high-energy gamma emitter. So you can actually test a thyroid with a Geiger counter. Geiger counters only measure gamma radiation. They don't measure beta and they don't measure alpha. Now in Fukushima, I'll talk about that in a while, but during the meltdowns, there were 3 meltdowns within about 3 days. Never before in history had this ever happened. The Japanese were monitoring where the radiation went. Well, first, in the first 3 days, it blew across the Pacific, right? And in Seattle, the ambient levels of radiation went up 40,000 times above normal. It was a lot of radiation. Then the wind changed and blew into Fukushima, south, east, west, Japan, and down to Tokyo. Now, there's a system called SPEEDY, which was established so that they could monitor if anyone was testing nuclear weapons. And they test the radiation in the air. And the Americans were flying around in their aeroplanes monitoring the gamma radiation. So the Japanese government knew the radiation was going up into Fukushima Prefecture, but they didn't tell the people. So the people fled into the path of the highest radiation level because the Japanese government, quotes, didn't want to create panic. Can you understand that from a medical perspective? That's really wicked not to tell people they're fleeing into the path of the highest levels of radiation. So they were enveloped in clouds of hundreds of isotopes emitting high levels of gamma radiation. So they were receiving external gamma radiation like X-rays and inhaling radioactive iodine and cesium and noble gases into their lungs and into their bodies. And then there's something called ground shine. The isotopes land on the ground and the ground irradiates from gamma radiation. So you're like walking in an X-ray field the whole time. So the people didn't know. So what has happened is the government in Fukushima has decided to ultrasound thyroids of about, I think it's 300,000 children under the age of 18, less than 18. Now, about 43.5% have either nodules or cysts. And they are only doing fine needle biopsies of nodules greater than ½ centimetre. Now you can have a tiny little carcinoma developing which is less than ½ centimetre. So size doesn't denote whether a nodule is malignant or benign. But those who've been tested, they've found 12 children already with thyroid cancer, and they've had total thyroidectomies. 15 more are suspected of having it. And this is within the first 2 years. Many more will develop thyroid cancer, almost certainly. The normal incidence of thyroid cancer in children is 1 in 1 million. Yet the Japanese government is saying, and the man who's doing the test, I think it's Yamashita, I can't remember his name, he's saying, well, it's not caused by radiation, which is an overt lie, because obviously it is. And after Chernobyl, thyroid cancer didn't develop for 4 years, and this is 2 years. 2 years, which indicates to me that these children got a hell of a dose of radioactive iodine, as well as everything else that was in that plume, right? And it means that everyone else got high doses of radiation into their lungs and their liver and their spleen and their bones, indicating that we are going to see an epidemic of cancer. Now in Chernobyl, there's a wonderful publication put out by the New York Academy of Sciences called Chernobyl, and they took 5,000 papers published in Russia, Slavic, and for the first time these papers were translated into English. The WHO and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and the World Health Organization, they didn't do any studies. They extrapolated by working out how much radiation escaped, and therefore they worked out the dose estimate. But they guessed to the people and said only, I don't know, 4,000 people will get cancer. The WHO has an agreement with the IAEA which promotes nuclear power to say they will not examine any nuclear accident without permission of the IAEA. So they are a suspect organisation. This is a most extraordinary document. 6,000 children or more have developed cancer, but the incidence of diabetes is high, of sudden heart attacks because cesium concentrates in the myocardium and in the pancreas and in the thyroid. Premature aging is developing in children, progeria. A lot of people are developing cataracts of their eyes related to the radiation. Children, there are many children being born with microcephaly, mentally retarded. There are homes full of grossly deformed children that we've never seen before in the history of paediatrics. And that's because of teratogenesis, like the drug thalidomide, which caused a genetically, chromosomally normal fetus to be damaged by radiation getting in through the placenta, damaging a cell that's going to form the left half of the brain or the leg or whatever. This is new, and this is what we're going to be seeing in Hiroshima and not Fukushima as people eat radioactive food and the radiation gets into their fetuses. This is so serious, and it's all being covered up by the Japanese government. They're only looking at thyroids, they're not looking at any other abnormalities. So let's get on to the next isotope, radioactive iodine. And they're still measuring that, so therefore it means fission is still going on in the reactor, in the melted reactor cores. Cesium-137, you've all heard about that. It's a beta and gamma and easy to measure. It's a potassium analogue, so it goes to the brain causing brain cancers, to the muscle causing rhabdomyosarcomas, to the testicles and ovaries where it can mutate the genes and also cause testicular cancer, ovarian cancer and the like. It's ubiquitous. It has a half-life of 30 years, so it's around for 300 or so years, all over Japan. And it bioconcentrates in the food chain by orders of magnitude at each step, from the soil, into the grass, into the cattle, into the milk, into the breast milk, into the baby, and in the sea, in the algae, in the crustaceans, in the little fish, in the big fish. And we can't taste radiation. We don't say in a piece of sushi that we get from Japan, I can taste the cesium in this fish. You see? And when your cancer develops, 20 years later and you cough up your first bit of blood, have hemoptysis, the cancer doesn't wear a sign saying, I was made by some cesium you ate in a piece of sushi from Japan 20 years ago. Because no cancer denotes its origin. Very dangerous stuff. Then the strontium-90, which is also a beta and a gamma. No, it's not a gamma, it's a beta. And it has a half-life of 28 years, so it's around for 300. And of course, it's a bone seeker. It's a calcium analogue. So, of course, it can cause osteogenic sarcoma, I suppose osteoid osteoma, multiple myeloma, leukemia, maybe polycythemia vera, because the bone marrow will be irradiated and a red blood cell might become malignant or a white blood cell might become malignant. Last but not all is an alpha emitter made in reactors called plutonium. Now the reason that man first fissioned uranium was to make this. It's named after Pluto. Who is Pluto? Not the dog. Who is Pluto? God of the underworld. In Greek mythology. Plutonium is an alpha emitter. It's said that at 1 millionth of a gram, 1 microgram, is carcinogenic. So if you inhale a microgram into your lung, almost certainly you'll develop lung cancer. It is an iron analogue, right? So it combines with the transferrin protein to be transported around the body. So it causes lung cancer, but also macrophages pick it up and transfer it to the mediastinal lymph glands, where it can develop into non-Hodgkin's or Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's stored in the liver, where it can cause liver cancer. It goes to the bone, where of course it can cause leukemia or osteogenic sarcoma. It crosses the placenta because the body thinks it's iron, so the placenta lets it through into the fetus, where, like thalidomide, it will be teratogenic. And it has a predilection for testicles. I don't know why, but it tends to locate next to the spermatogonia, the precursors of the sperm, where it's going to irradiate the sperm to induce mutations passed on generation to generation. Meanwhile, if the man gets cremated, the smoke and the plutonium go out the chimney, so another man can inhale the plutonium and it can get into his testicles. So there'll be an exponential increase in genetic disease for the rest of time. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,400 years. So it lasts for 250,000 years. But it's great stuff because all you need is about 2.5 kilos to make yourself a nuclear weapon. It's the fuel for nuclear bombs. That's what they made during the Manhattan Project to make the bombs that blew. The bomb on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. And each reactor makes 250 kilos of the stuff a year, which will last for 250,000 years. Now, the Americans and the Japanese and the Russians are selling nuclear power plants all over the world. But don't forget, it's for peaceful nuclear energy. Peaceful. But if you get someone like, well, I didn't think Gaddafi was so bad, but let's think of a bad one. You know, a bad dictator. I won't name a few. They have a nuclear power plant. Oh, it's for peaceful nuclear purposes. But they can make bombs. And that's what India did, and Pakistan did, and Israel did. So most countries that have nuclear weapons made them from their so-called peaceful nuclear power plants. So nuclear power plants are bomb factories. And once you have a nuclear power plant, for the next 250,000 years, any dictator or government can make nuclear weapons. Oh, but they say, here's a peaceful power plant, you're not allowed to make bombs. We're the only ones who are allowed to make bombs. America, they make bombs. They're going to spend $80 billion in the next 10 years making their bombs more accurate to drop in Europe. The Americans are mad. And I tell them too. When I lecture to America, you know, they think they're the greatest country on earth. I said, you're not the greatest country on earth. What about Australia? We've got kangaroos. And then they all laugh. They're very funny, the Americans. They don't understand a lot. Okay, so that's plutonium. It's deadly, deadly stuff. All cancers can be induced by radiation, not just thyroid. And the International Atomic Energy Agency in WHO say only thyroid cancer. So they lie and they lie and they lie. And I'm so sick of scientists who lie. In medicine, if we lied, we'd be killing our patients. And we would be deregistered. You know, that would be the end of us. We can't lie in medicine. You can't lie in science. Like, people lie about global warming. It's happening. And I don't believe there should be people on the radio and television who lie to the general public who don't understand science anyway. Do you know? Anyway, you've got three reactors up in the north, right? 2 are the same design as the Fukushima reactors. And you want to build, you're building a 4th one, which is a jerry-built crazy thing where the Taiwanese are building it, but you don't understand really. The pipes are too small or the holes are too big. It's got so many problems. If that opens, you're in trouble. And you've got 2 to the south. And if there's a meltdown, it will totally blanket your island. So let me walk you through a few slides to actually show you, with the help of my friend. Do you all understand how Fukushima happened? You do, don't you? I mean, there was an earthquake and there was a tsunami and the power plants were flooded and the diesel generators stopped working because they were flooded and they lost their external power supply and actually the manager who was coping with this at the time has just died of esophageal cancer. And the Japanese government and industry TEPCO are saying, oh, it wasn't related to the accident. What? He's worked in the nuclear industry for decades. Almost certainly that esophageal cancer was induced by radiation, I would say. Swallowing isotopes into the body, and the isotopes give a much stronger, higher dose of radiation than external radiation. And the other thing about being cumulative is, each dose of radiation you receive causes more mutations. Some will be repaired and some will not. And then all the food that the Japanese people are eating increases the cesium that's stored in there muscle and their heart and their thyroid, adding to the risk because it increases the dose of radiation they're receiving from these internal emitters. Do not eat any Japanese food. And I hear that they're selling Fukushima grown food here. That must be banned. You must not eat any Japanese food. Do you understand? So the doctors here have to make sure President Ma bans Japanese food. Do you think he will? No. Well, then you've got to make him. Is this a democracy or not? Is it your country or President Ma's? Anyway, I won't talk about him really, his psychology. We've got a psychologist here, but I could postulate. Now, so here's Fukushima, and of course this is the exclusion zone, incredibly radioactive, but this blue, that's very radioactive, and it got down to Tokyo. And they've measured the soil in Tokyo. So radioactive is it. It's got uranium, plutonium, cesium, and other stuff in it. They took it back to America to measure it, and it was so radioactive it would be subject to being put in a radioactive waste facility in America. That's Tokyo. 35 million people live in Tokyo. It's in the dust in the floor, and people sleep on the floor on their tatami mats. Children come in with dust on their shoes. I mean, Tokyo is in bad trouble. But then, of course, this is also more fallout, all this brown here. Now, do you translate that to Taiwan? You're gone. And we met the police chief, no, the fire chief yesterday in Taipei, and they said, well, they've got evacuation plans for 9 million people who live within 40k of the reactors. Oh yeah, they'll evacuate them, yeah? And they said, no, put them in shelters. Well, so the air doesn't get through the windows and people don't have to breathe air, which comes in, and the radiation lasts for days and weeks and months. Okay, now, this is Chernobyl. This is the reactor. What happened was that there was a stupid man who was a specialist in hydroelectricity running the reactor. And in the middle of the night, he did a crazy experiment and removed the control rods too fast. And there was a huge explosion. And the control room filled up with white dust. And he said to his 2 young men, go out and see what's happened. And they came back and they said, it's gone. And he said, what's gone? And they said, the reactor's gone. He said, don't be ridiculous, go out and check again. The reactor was gone. Those people died very shortly of acute radiation illness, which happened to the people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima with alopecia, purpura, thrombocytopenia, and severe nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. So, and the winds within the first 24 hours changed in all directions and blew right across Russia and right across Europe. It was first picked up in Sweden because Gorbachev didn't tell the truth for 10 days. And the Swedes picked up this radiation. They said, what's going on? And it was worked out it was coming from this. And it burnt furiously for 10 days, and the radiation went up into the stratosphere. And fallout occurred all over Europe, including Turkey, which isn't on the map. Turkish food is extremely radioactive. The Turks were so annoyed with the Russians, they picked all the radioactive tea and sent it back to Russia. So the Russians could enjoy the radiation of the tea. But don't eat Turkish foods. Don't eat Turkish dried apricots or anything, because Turkey got a hell of a fallout. And it lasts. This contamination will last for at least 300 years. This is only the map of cesium. It's not the other elements either. Even in England, there are 360 farms growing lambs, and the government went to the farmers and said, you've got to close your farms because they're full, your lambs are full of cesium. And they said, well, how long? And they said, oh, about 100 years. No, it's 300 years. 40% of the European landmass is now radioactive. Don't eat European food. When I go there, I practice psychic numbing, and I do eat European food. And my daughter, who's a doctor, said, Mum, don't worry, you're too old to get your cancer anyway, because I'm 75, and the latent period of carcinogenesis, it's a long time. So she always makes me feel better. So, this is one man with one reactor, contaminated a whole continent. Okay? So go back to your reactors here. There's no escape, there's no evacuation, there's no sheltering. This is a lethal, carcinogenic industry which also promotes nuclear weapon proliferation. Now, I have to, how do I do this? Help! Now, I want to show you a chart with the radioactive elements in it, which are made in a reactor. See, I only mentioned 4, radioactive iodine, strontium, cesium, and plutonium. There's a whole cocktail of elements in a reactor which all escape during a meltdown, and some escape with a normally operating reactor all the time. For instance, tritium, H3, there's nothing that prevents the escape of tritium except gold, because it's so dense. So a reactor can't operate without continuously releasing tritium into the air, which turns into tritiated water, H3O, which is absorbed through the skin. Skin lets nothing through, but tritium gets through. Tritium is a soft beta emitter and very carcinogenic. And so if you live near a reactor, you're at risk. Tritium concentrates in your vegetables and your fruit. There's 2 studies from Germany and France to show children under the age of 5 living within 5k of a reactor have double the incidence of leukemia and a high incidence of solid cancers. It's dangerous to live near a nuclear power plant. So we'll scroll down and we'll start. Here we go. Now, some have very short half-lives and some have half-lives of thousands or millions of years. Tritium, beryllium, carbon, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine-36, argon, 2 isotopes of potassium, 2 isotopes of calcium, 2 isotopes of scandium, vanadium, manganese, iron, cobalt, nickel, zinc, selenium, krypton, rubidium, strontium, yttrium, zirconium, and many of these have not been studied biologically to see where they go in the food chain or in the human body. Niobium, molybdenum, technetium, ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, silver, cadmium, indium, tin, antimony, tellurium. Do you learn this in medical school? I'm sure you learn about other toxins, huh? BPA, phthalates, and the rest, but you're not learning this. Cesium, barium, lanthanum, cerium, presidium, niobium, promethium, samarium, gadolinium, terbium, I can't pronounce this one, dysprosium, holmium, thallumium. See, physicists have had a lot of fun naming all these isotopes. Lutetium, hafnium, tantalum, tungsten, rhenium, osmium, iridium, platinum, thallium, lead, bismuth, polonium. Polonium is an alpha emitter and terribly toxic. Remember that man Litvinenko, the Russian, who went to Claridge's in London and had some afternoon tea, and someone dropped a drop of polonium in his tea, and he died of acute radiation illness 2 weeks later with alopecia and bleeding to death. Radon. Radon is a potent carcinogen. Francium. Radium killed Madame Curie. She used to walk around with a little piece of radium in her lab coat pocket. When she died of aplastic anemia, she was so radioactive, her bones had to be buried in a special radioactive area. Her daughter, and all her papers are radioactive, her daughter died of leukemia, and I think her husband did too. Actinium, thorium, proctinium, uranium, neptunium. Now these are all alpha emitters, potent carcinogens. Neptunium, and an alpha emitter develops when a uranium atom captures a neutron, and it's heavier than uranium. Neptunium, plutonium I've described. Now plutonium-241 has a short half-life. It's an alpha, but it decays to americium-241, which is a potent gamma emitter. And so what they say in this Chernobyl book is that Europe is going to become more and more radioactive as the plutonium-241 decays to americium-241. And many of these elements decay to daughters which are more radioactive, and they last for a hell of a long time, and people don't understand that. Americium, named after what? Curium, named after Madame Curie. Berkelium, named after Berkeley. Californium, and that's it. So do you see how important it is that we understand this? No one talks about this. No one really knows it. I mean, what you should do is kidnap President Ma and take him back to your sitting room and chain one leg to the couch and show him that. Hmm? Now I need to go on to the next thing if I can. Okay, so this is quite a simple thing showing the path of just iodine, cesium and strontium into the food chain, soil, and concentrating by orders of magnitude up the food chain into the human body, and of course she's pregnant. But internal emitters, that is these things that getting into the body, the isotopes, as opposed to external radiation, are 10 to 100 times more damaging than the equivalent external dose. And it's very interesting, the World Health Organization, UNSCR, that's another UN organization, International Atomic Energy Agency, ICRP, etc. They make worldwide dose limits, and they're physicists. And it's all by extrapolation and estimations. It's not medical. They totally ignore the human fetus, which is 1 X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in the fetus. That's why we don't X-ray pregnant women women in the first half of their menstrual cycle. They totally ignore internal emitters. Isn't that amazing? They ignore genomic instability, if you know what that is. That's very important now in genetics. They ignore the latent period of carcinogenesis. Then they ignore every radiation-induced cancer except thyroid cancer. Can you believe that? This is medically... It's like getting a nuclear physicist to do an anastomosis of the bowel after he's removed a carcinoma, you know? They don't know what they're talking about. And yet we let them take over the standards, and then they say, well, radiation's okay and nuclear power's terrific. Now, there's a man called Timothy Mousseau, who's an evolutionary biologist, who's going into the evacuation, the zones, exclusion zones around Fukushima and Chernobyl, where the radiation is extremely high. We saw that from the chart we just saw, and he's putting his own life at risk. But he's looking at the birds and the insects to see what's going on. So here he examines barn swallows. There's a mutation. White. Another one. A mutation there. This one's got a very strange beak. I think that's a tumour. Here's a strange beak too. And these are tail feathers. They're all mutations. And I don't know what that is. Now, also, I told you that radiation causes cataracts. So these are the barn swallows, the eyes. Look, they're all cataracts. So it causes blindness, and there are a lot of cataracts in people exposed at Chernobyl. These are firebugs, and if you look at a firebug, it looks like an African mask, the eyes and the nose and the mouth, but you can see they're all deformed. Plus, they're missing legs and antennae and the like. These are all mutants. Okay? And here's a tomato grown in Fukushima. Now, what happens to plants and what happens to insects and what happens to animals happens to us. Only it's long-term for us. We take a long time to see mutations, but we test all drugs that we use on animals first to extrapolate to see if they're dangerous or safe for humans. So here's the data. This man is doing pioneering work which will change radiation standards globally. He may die in the process. I believe that he should in time get the Nobel Prize. And that's all. I think I've given you enough to think about, but certainly I would like to take any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
现在我们开放问题了哦，那大家尽量发问哦，中文、英文都可以哦。你如果要趁机会练习英文也很好哦，大家尽量发问。哦，我们这边也有医学院的学生，有这个生物资讯的学生，有做遗传的哈、哦，大家尽量发问。
不好意思，我想请问，如果长期居住
，Oh, he needs a microphone so they can't hear. Yeah. Perhaps he needs to come down to the front.
因为这样他们才能。
我想请问，如果长期居住于核电厂，就像是现在的核一厂、核能二厂旁边，那如果长期居住那边，那身体会有什么样的病变，或者是什么样的威胁之类的？就是政府没有告诉我们的事情。
Well, everything I told you in my lecture, the government has not told you. And if you live near a nuclear power plant, you're liable to get